Iowa football actually produces a lot of big-time linemen, except it's usually on the offensive end. Outside of AJ Epinesa, the Hawkeyes have not been known to produce a ton of defensive end prospects in the first round, but the subject of today's video could change that. The craziest thing is the guy is currently a backup, but has a chance to become a top 10 pick in the 2023 NFL Draft. Yes, he has never started a game for the Hawkeyes, but currently, he's one of those players that is flying into the first round, and recently, I saw him as high as 7th or 8th in some drafts, and could be an absolute steal in this year's draft. In today's video, I'm going to introduce you to who this prospect is, go through how he got to this point, and then talk about his future. But before we get started, let me know what NFL draft prospect I can cover next. Be sure to like the video if you want to support what I'm doing, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's get started. So you're probably wondering who the subject of today's video is, and it is none other than Iowa defensive lineman Lukas Van Ness. But in order to understand how Lukas Van Ness went from someone who wasn't even ranked inside the top 1,000 to a potential top 10 pick, we first need to go back in time. Lukas grew up in a house divided, as both of his parents went to Iowa State, and his older sister went to Iowa. So, ultimately he did have a lot of Iowa connections around him, but he fell in love with the Hawkeyes. He said, quote, "I actually went to a couple Hawkeyes games growing up, and I sat right there on the side of the field and watched the players and was able to touch their helmets. I always thought that'd be a super cool dream of mine to do." Except football was not much of a thought for a while, as his first love was actually on the ice in Chicago. At 6 years old, Lukas began to play the sport of hockey, and that was by far his favorite sport and his future. He said, quote, "Yeah, hockey was my first love. I've always played hockey my entire life, and I'm actually relatively new to football. I just started playing football my freshman year, and it was something I really didn't even want to do, but my mom kind of pushed me into it, and thank God she did, because I love the game of football now, and it's crazy how that works." So as he said, he started playing football when he got to high school, but he credits hockey with developing his conditioning and his lateral movement, and that has helped him in football tremendously. That skill actually helped him get noticed later on at football camps, but first, he would need to blow up. When he arrived at Barrington High School, Van Ness had a completely different mindset when it came to his role on the team. He said, quote, "My goal is to be best friends with everyone on the team. I want to be a leader on the team, support my brothers, and make big plays when necessary." His team-first approach would actually lead to him taking on a lot of leadership roles, and this achievement would lead to him blowing up on both the football field and in the classroom. He's also still a hockey player, as he eventually got his team to the Final Four in high school, but ultimately they fell short. And while he did think about playing hockey in college for a little while, him blowing up on the football field made the choice pretty easy. Physical traits would end up helping Van Ness a lot, as some would say he hit the genetic lottery, and at 6'5" and 230 pounds, he played both offensive and defensive line, and quickly became a big-time 3-star recruit, with schools from all around the Midwest wanting him. He remembers a few moments during his recruitment, and Iowa assistant Coach Bell said, quote, "You're exactly what I'm looking for." Van Ness said that Coach Bell wanted him because he wanted guys who were tall and long and had good athletic ability. He had really been emphasizing that he wanted kids with speed and length and the ability to play all the different positions on the defensive line and not just suck playing defensive end or defensive tackle. Well, Van Ness would end up blowing up, as a senior, he finished the season with 49 tackles, 24 tackles for loss, and 7 sacks. He led Barrington High School to a 6-4 record, and as I said earlier, also had success on the hockey rink. This would end up having an impact on Lukas's recruiting decision, as Iowa was one of his final schools, and he chose them over 31 other offers. This included Big Ten schools such as Illinois, Minnesota, and Kansas State. He also had tremendous success in the classroom, as he had 6 Ivy League offers. Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale all wanted Van Ness to come to their school to play football, and I'm sure he thought about that. But why did he choose the Hawkeyes? He said, quote, "I grew up a Hawkeye fan, and I've always loved the University of Iowa. When I started the whole recruiting process, I always thought what it would be like to play at Iowa. I set that as a goal for myself from the beginning, so when I actually got an opportunity to come to Iowa, I knew it was right for me. When I visited, it instantly felt at home with the culture and their team-first mentality. The coaches also were always supporting the players, and it was something that I loved and I wanted to be there, so that's why after my official visit, I felt I needed to commit right away because that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be a Hawkeye." For a while, Van Ness was seen as a riser in the recruiting world, but he never cracked the top 1,000 recruits, unfortunately. Except, like Iowa always does, they find diamonds in the rough. According to 24/7 Sports, Lukas Van Ness was the 3-star recruit, the number 52 S defensive end, and the 1,063rd best player in the class of 2020. So, how would he do in Iowa City? When Van Ness arrived at Iowa, AJ Epinesa was leaving, so he had a chance to come in and make an impact early on. He said, quote, "We haven't really heard anything about redshirting or playing time, but obviously with Epinesa leaving, there are some big gaps to fill in the defensive line. We've been told if you come in and work your tail off every day, you're eventually going to see the field." That is exactly what Van Ness would do, except he would end up redshirting. He'd get stronger, get more familiar with the system, and was ready to blossom in 2021. He's one of those guys that was going to be towards the end of the depth chart, but this didn't matter as he would blow up as a freshman. He'd record his first career sack in their Week 1 victory over number 17 Indiana, and then he helped them upset number 9 Iowa State by deflecting a pass. He had a career-high 7 tackles and 2 sacks against Kent State in Week 3, had a sack against Colorado State, and a sack on the road against Northwestern. He had 6 tackles and a sack in a road victory over Nebraska, and would help Iowa get to the Big Ten championship. Unfortunately, they would end up losing, but the Hawkeyes would still qualify for a bowl game, and in that game against Kentucky, he'd also have a sack. Van Ness had one of the most productive seasons for an Iowa defensive lineman as a freshman ever, as he finished with 33 tackles and 7 sacks. Because of that, he was named a freshman All-American by multiple sources, and then going into the 2022 season, he would change positions. This would help him tremendously. After being moved permanently to defensive end, he said, quote, "I guess you could call it home. I definitely enjoy being outside. I like the space and being able to use my abilities. I definitely do like defensive end." Little did he know how much changing positions would change his life. An Iowa defensive tackle said, quote, "He looks like a mini Hercules. He has a 6-pack and he's like 275 pounds. So combining his physical traits with a productive redshirt freshman season, he was projected to break out, and he got even better in 2022. He ended up finishing the season with 33 tackles with 6 sacks. Offenses were starting to scheme around him, and despite being a more known commodity and having everything against him, he still had pretty much the same stats, and according to PFF, he got even more productive. They matched up against Kentucky again in the bowl game, and this time he helped them win 21-0. What's really interesting is Van Ness never started the game, but he was one of the top players on the team in terms of snaps, and after getting a 2nd to 3rd round grade for this year's draft, he was going to enter the 2023 draft. As I said, the craziest part is that he hasn't even started a game in college yet, but right now, Van Ness is flying up draft boards. I have seen him as high as the top 10, with the consensus of him being a 1st round pick. He has tremendous size, has been really productive, seemingly has the mental tools, and is also extremely quick. That is why the pros really like him, and think that he could not only be one of the fastest risers in this year's draft, but be very productive for a long time. He also apparently has very good instincts, has an incredible spin move, is good against the run, and has really good hands. The one thing that scouts are a little bit worried about is that he breaks down against elusive ball carriers, is susceptible to cut blocks, and didn't have great change of direction. But either way, Van Ness is someone who's been garnering a ton of draft buzz and will most likely be taken in the 1st round and could go in the top 10. We'll have to wait and see what happens in the combine, but this is pretty good for a guy who didn't start playing football till high school, wasn't ranked inside the top 1,000, and has never even started a game. Good for Van Ness, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you're an Iowa fan, let me know what you think of Van Ness, and do you want your NFL team drafting him? Be sure to let me know down below. Let me know what prospect I can cover in my next video. Subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.